Victoria Bradley slammed the folder so hard on Michael Turner's mop cart that the echo bounced off every wall in that empty hallway, and then she looked him dead in the eyes and said, "People like you don't get second chances. Clean it up and stay out of my way." He said nothing. He just bent down, picked up every scattered paper off the floor, handed it back to her, and walked away with his head held high. What she didn't know was that 48 hours later, that same man would be the only thing standing between her and the cold that could have killed her. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. Michael Turner had a rule he lived by, one his father drilled into him when he was just a boy growing up in rural Kentucky. Never let anyone make you feel smaller than God made you. He thought about that rule a lot these days. He thought about it every morning at 5:47 a.m. when he punched in at Veritech Solutions, a sleek glass and steel tech company headquartered in Denver, Colorado, and wheeled his custodial cart into the lobby. He thought about it when executives walked past him without a glance. He thought about it when someone left a mess in the break room and acted like it cleaned itself up. And he thought about it most on the days when Victoria Bradley came through that lobby. Victoria Bradley moved through a building the way a storm moved through a valley, fast, deliberate, and leaving everything slightly rearranged in her wake. She was 51 years old, sharp as a razor, and had built Veritech from a struggling software startup into a company worth $3.2 billion. People respected her. People feared her. People tried to stay out of her direct line of sight on bad days, which if you worked at Veritech felt like most days. Michael had worked there for 4 years. In those 4 years, Victoria Bradley had spoken directly to him exactly 3 times, twice to tell him a hallway wasn't clean enough, and once to tell him the elevator smelled like whatever he'd used to mop it and that the smell was unacceptable. She'd never asked his name. He was reasonably certain she didn't know it. That was fine. That was just how it was. Michael had a son to raise. That was the beginning and end of his priorities. His boy Caleb was 9 years old, bright, funny, obsessed with dinosaurs and baseball, and already somehow developing the same quiet intensity Michael saw in himself when he looked in the mirror. Caleb's mother had left when Caleb was 3. No warning, no fight. Just a note on the kitchen table and an empty closet. Michael had stood in that room for a long time, looking at the empty hangers. Then he'd gone into the living room, sat down next to his son, who was watching cartoons, and decided that he would be enough. He had to be enough. He went from working construction, which paid better, but was brutal on his body, and unpredictable with the hours, to applying for every steady schedule job he could find. The janitor position at Veritech wasn't glamorous, but it was consistent. It was 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday, which meant he was at Caleb's school by pickup time. It had health insurance. And it was his. He wasn't ashamed of it, not once. His mother, though, had her opinions. "Michael, baby, you have a degree," she'd said more than once in that gentle, aching voice that somehow cut deeper than shouting. "You could do more." "I'm doing what I need to do, Mama," he'd tell her. "Caleb doesn't need me to have a fancy title. He needs me to be there." And he was there, every single day. The Friday that everything changed started like any other. Michael was on the 4th floor near the executive suite finishing up the hallway floors. The building was half empty. It was late afternoon, and most of the staff had already headed home. There was a company retreat scheduled for the weekend. An annual thing, a leadership gathering at the Ridgeline Lodge, a mountain property about 2 hours outside Denver. The senior executives went every year. The lodge sat up in the Rocky Mountain foothills, beautiful in summer, remote and serious in winter. And it was January. Michael wasn't going, obviously. He was just working. He had earbuds in. He was listening to an old Johnny Cash album that Caleb had laughed at when he first heard it, then slowly, quietly started humming along to when he turned the corner with his cart and almost walked directly into Victoria Bradley. She stopped. He stopped. He pulled one earbud out. "Watch where you're going," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Sorry. She looked at his cart, then at him, with the expression of someone who had just noticed an inconvenient piece of furniture. You're in the executive corridor. I'm cleaning it, he said. Same as every Friday. Something moved across her face, not quite irritation, not quite embarrassment, but somewhere between the two. Then she walked past him without another word. He put his earbud back in. Johnny Cash kept singing about a boy named Sue. He didn't think about that encounter again until the next morning when his supervisor, a round-faced, apologetic man named Gerald, called him into the supply room with the look of someone about to deliver bad news. Michael, Gerald started. What happened? The company shuttle for the retreat, one of the drivers called in sick. The other one, well. Gerald rubbed the back of his neck. There was a miscommunication, and we ended up with more executives registered than we have vehicles for. Gerald? I know. Gerald, I'm not a driver. You have a clean record, and you drove the facilities truck last spring when we did the equipment move. That was 3 miles across parking lots. The lodge is 2 hours up Route 9. Gerald paused. Ms. Bradley needs to be at the lodge by 6 tonight for the opening dinner. The last shuttle is already full. I wouldn't ask if I had another option. Michael looked at him for a long moment. What does it pay? Gerald told him. Michael thought about the leak in Caleb's bedroom ceiling that had been on his list for 3 months. He thought about the baseball cleats Caleb needed before spring season started. Fine, he said. Gerald exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater. Thank you. Truly. Ms. Bradley will be downstairs with her bags at 4:30. She know it's me driving? Gerald's expression answered that before his mouth did. She knows it's a Veritech facilities driver. Right. Victoria Bradley arrived in the lobby at 4:37. A black rolling suitcase, a leather briefcase, a wool coat that probably cost more than Michael made in a month, and the expression of someone whose day had been a long series of disappointments. She stopped when she saw him standing next to the company SUV. You're the driver. Yes, ma'am. She looked at him the way people looked at something they couldn't immediately categorize. You're the janitor. I work in facilities maintenance, yes. And tonight I'm your driver. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked at the vehicle, then looked at the sky which had gone the color of old pewter, heavy and low. How long to the lodge? About 2 hours depending on conditions. What conditions? The weather. There's a storm system coming in. We should get ahead of it if we leave now. She handed him her suitcase without a word. He put it in the back. She got in the passenger seat. They pulled out of the parking garage at 4:42 p.m. For the first 40 minutes, neither of them said anything. Michael drove. Victoria worked, tapping away on her phone, occasionally muttering something under her breath, her briefcase open across her lap. The road climbed steadily as they left the city behind the skyline, shrinking in the rearview mirror, the landscape opening up into foothills and pine trees and long empty stretches of highway that Michael had always secretly loved. He watched the sky more than the GPS. It was moving fast. That heavy grayness was deepening, and there was a quality to the light that he recognized not from experience in mountains specifically, but from years of watching weather patterns with the particular attention of a man who'd spent a lot of time working outdoors. It was the light that came before something serious. We're going to hit snow soon, he said. Victoria didn't look up. How much? Enough to matter. There's nothing in the forecast. Forecasts get it wrong up here. The mountains do their own thing. She glanced up at him, then briefly, and went back to her phone. Drive faster. He did not drive faster. He maintained a steady, careful speed and watched the first flakes hit the windshield 20 minutes later, small and exploratory. At first, then heavier, then within the space of about 15 minutes, serious. This is fine, Victoria said more to herself than to him. It's getting worse. We're 30 minutes out. Keep going. He kept going. But the snow wasn't cooperating with Victoria Bradley's schedule. It rarely did. That was the thing about snowstorms. They didn't check anyone's calendar. By the time they turned onto the last stretch of Route 9 before the Ridgeline Lodge turnoff, The road had gone from manageable to something else entirely. Snow was falling in thick, blinding curtains, and the wind had picked up until it was pushing against the side of the SUV with real force. Michael slowed to a crawl. "What are you doing?" Victoria's voice was sharp. "I can't see the edge of the road." "You're going 15 miles an hour. I'm aware of that. We need to." And that was when the front right wheel dropped. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like a crash, not exactly. It felt like the road simply ended where it wasn't supposed to, like the shoulder had given way under the accumulated snow and ice, and suddenly the front of the SUV tilted at an angle that was very wrong, very fast. Victoria grabbed the door handle. Michael hit the brakes, controlled, deliberate, no panic, and the vehicle slid another 2 feet before it stopped. Its front end dipped down into a roadside ditch. Back end still on the pavement. All 4 wheels still on solid ground, but going nowhere. Silence. The wind hit the windshield like a fist. "Are you hurt?" Michael asked. "No." Her voice was tight. "Are we stuck?" He tried the accelerator. The back tires spun. He tried again, slower, more patient. Nothing. "Yes," he said. "We're stuck." Victoria got out of the car while he was still assessing, which surprised him. He expected her to sit there and demand solutions. Instead, she walked around to the front, looked at the ditch, looked at the road, looked at the wall of snow coming down around them, and stood there for a moment, with her arms crossed and her jaw set. Then she took out her phone and held it up to the sky like an offering. "No signal," she said. "No." "Call for help." "With what?" She turned to look at him. In the white fury of the storm, her face was stripped of the usual armor she wore in the office, the carefully composed authority, the practiced certainty. She just looked like a person standing in a blizzard. "The lodge is less than a mile up that road," Michael said. "We walk. In this, we don't have another option. We could wait in the car. We could. But the temperature is dropping fast, and I don't have enough fuel to run the heat all night, and if the snow keeps coming, we'll be buried by morning." She looked at the car. She looked at the road. She looked at him. "I'm wearing heels," she said. He opened the back of the SUV and pulled out the emergency kit he'd checked before they left out of habit, out of the same quiet, systematic care he brought to everything in his life. He found the emergency foil blanket, the first aid kit, a pair of heavy work gloves he'd left in the back last winter, and a wool beanie that said Denver Broncos on it in faded orange letters. He held the beanie out to her. She stared at it. "It'll keep your ears from freezing," he said. Victoria Bradley, CEO of Veritex Solutions, took the Broncos beanie and put it on her head without another word. They started walking. It was the longest mile either of them had covered in a long time. The snow was mid-calf in places. The wind came at them sideways, and Victoria was struggling. Not complaining, he noted, not whining or demanding or losing it, but legitimately struggling her heels, punching through the snowpack with every step. After the 3rd time, she nearly went down. Michael said without making a ceremony of it, "Hold my arm." She hesitated for half a second. "I'm not asking," he said. She took his arm. They moved that way, slow, steady, leaning into the wind together for the better part of 40 minutes. He talked her through the pace. Not with inspirational speeches, just simple practical things. Small steps. Watch for ice under the powder. Don't look up into the wind. Keep your chin down. The kind of instructions that kept moving when moving was the only thing that mattered. She didn't say much, but she didn't let go of his arm. And somewhere in the middle of that long, white, howling stretch of road, something shifted between them. Not anything romantic, not anything grand. Just the simple, irreducible fact that in this moment they were 2 human beings in the same storm, and the distance between CEO and janitor was utterly, completely meaningless. The lights of the lodge appeared through the snow like something out of a dream, warm amber, impossible. Victoria stopped walking for just a second when she saw them. "Come on," Michael said. Almost there. I know, she said. But she didn't move for another moment. She just stood there looking at those lights, and something in her face was very different from the woman who had walked past him in the hallway without seeing him. Then she nodded, and they kept walking. When they finally pushed through the lodge's front door and the heat hit them like a wave, Michael heard Victoria let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for the entire 2 hours since they'd left Denver. He pulled off his gloves. His hands were red and aching. The lodge manager, a bearded man named Carl, who looked like he'd been built for exactly these situations, came around the desk immediately. Lord Almighty, where did you come from? Route 9, Michael said. We went in a ditch about a mile back. In this storm, you walked in. Carl was already moving, already calling for someone to bring towels and hot drinks. Are you both all right? Anyone else in the car? Just the two of us. Carl looked at Victoria, who was standing very still, melting snow dripping from the brim of the Bronco's beanie. Ma'am, are you okay? Victoria opened her mouth to give the answer she always gave fine. I'm fine. Let's move on. And what came out instead was a very small, very honest, I don't know. Michael looked at her. She looked at the floor. And Carl ushered them both to the fireplace, which was roaring in the great room, while outside the storm pressed its face against every window in the lodge, and settled in for the long, serious business of the night. Michael sat down in a chair by the fire and held his cold hands toward the heat. He didn't know yet what the night would cost them, what it would open up, what it would strip away. He didn't know that by morning, the two of them would know each other in ways that had nothing to do with org charts or pay grades, or the polished machinery of professional distance. All he knew right now was that his son was safe with his mother for the weekend, and he was alive, and the fire was warm. That was enough. For now. If you're watching this from Chicago, from Houston, from somewhere out there with your coffee and your quiet Saturday, drop your city below. Let me know you're out there. And if this story is speaking to you, subscribe and stay close. Michael and Victoria's night is just beginning, and it's about to get a lot more real. Carl brought them both hot coffee and a stack of thick wool blankets, without being asked which was the kind of quiet competence Michael recognized, and respected the kind that came from years of actually doing the work, not just managing it. He set the mugs on the low table between the two chairs by the fire, and retreated without ceremony, understanding somehow that these two people needed a moment before they needed anything else. Victoria hadn't taken the Bronco's beanie off yet. She was sitting with her knees together, both hands wrapped around the mug, staring into the fire. Her wool coat was draped over the arm of the chair, still damp at the shoulders. Her heels were on the floor beside her feet. She was in her stocking feet. Michael noticed all of this the way he noticed most things, quietly without comment. He drank his coffee. The fire cracked and settled. Outside, the storm was doing something serious now. He could hear it in the way the windows flexed slightly against the pressure of the wind, that low structural groan that old mountain buildings made when the weather really committed. The lodge's other guests, the Veritech executives, who'd made it up before the storm hit, had apparently retreated to their rooms for the evening. The great room was empty, except for the two of them, and the fire, and the sound of the storm making its case outside. It was Victoria who broke the silence first. "How did you know?" she said. He looked at her. "Know what? To bring the emergency kit. The gloves. She touched the beanie briefly, then put her hand back on the mug. "Most people don't think like that." "Most people don't think it'll happen to them," Michael said. "I just try to be ready." She considered that. "Ready for what specifically? For the thing you didn't plan for?" He paused. "Because that's usually the thing that matters." Victoria looked at him for a moment with an expression he'd never seen on her face in 4 years of working in the same building. It wasn't assessment exactly, though, that was part of it. It was more like she was recalibrating something, adjusting some internal measurement that had come back wrong. "I had a full itinerary for tonight," she said. "The opening dinner. A review session with 3 of my VPs. A call with a board member at 9. She almost smiled, not quite, but almost. None of that's happening. No, Michael said. I haven't lost control of a schedule in 4 years. Well, he said, the mountain doesn't know that. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but closer than he would have expected. Carl came back through the room, pausing near them. I've got your bags from the car. The road crew grabbed them before the ditch got worse. Your rooms are ready. But I should tell you both, the power grid up here is spotty in storms like this one. We've got a generator, but it's older, and if we lose the main line tonight, it'll run the heat in the kitchen, but not a lot else. The Wi-Fi, Victoria said immediately. Carl's expression was sympathetic. Probably not, ma'am. My phone needs to charge. I've got charging stations at the front desk running off the generator circuit. You're welcome to plug in there. She nodded, and Carl moved on. The moment he was gone, she stood up, not in a reckless way, just the automatic movement of a woman who processed problems by moving, and picked up her phone from the table where she'd set it. Dead, she said. Flat. Almost disbelieving. There's the station at the desk. I have calls to make. In this storm, those calls aren't getting made tonight, Michael said. No cell signal up here when it's like this, even if your phone was charged. She turned and looked at him with an expression that would have in the office stopped most people mid-sentence. It was the look that said, I didn't ask for your assessment. The look that preceded someone finding themselves on a performance review. Michael just looked back at her, steady, unimpressed. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then something in her shoulders dropped, barely perceptible, but there, and she set the phone back on the table and sat back down. I hate not being able to reach people, she said. Who do you need to reach? My assistant, my board contact, my VP of operations. We have a product launch in 11 days, and there are 17 things that could go wrong between now and then. Are any of those 17 things happening right now tonight? She opened her mouth, closed it. Probably not. Then they'll still be there tomorrow when the storm clears. You don't understand how it works, she said. Not cruelly, just with the certainty of someone who'd lived in a particular reality for so long they'd forgotten other realities existed. If I'm unreachable for 12 hours, things start to drift. People make decisions they shouldn't make. Or they freeze and make no decisions at all, which is worse. What about the people you've got running those departments? What about them? Don't you trust them? The question landed differently than he intended, or maybe exactly as he intended, he wasn't sure. Victoria looked at him sharply. That's not, she started. I'm not trying to be critical, he said. I'm genuinely asking. You've got a company with how many employees? 1,400. 1,400 people, and none of them can handle 11 hours without you. She was quiet for a moment. It's not about whether they can. She said the word like she was pulling it apart to examine it. It's about whether they'll do it the way it needs to be done. Your way. The right way. Michael nodded slowly. He didn't push it further. He wasn't here to win an argument. He understood something about people who controlled things obsessively. He understood it because he'd had to learn the hard way the difference between control and care. Being a single parent taught you that. You could grip the steering wheel as hard as you wanted, but the road still had its own ideas. He picked up his coffee again and let the silence breathe. Victoria wasn't done, though. That was the thing he was starting to understand about her. She wasn't finished with a thought just because she stopped speaking. She processed out loud in pieces, circling back. My COO has been with me for 6 years, she said after a while. That's a long time. He knows the company better than almost anyone. She paused. He probably knows what to do. Yeah, Michael said. He probably does. She made a sound quiet, complicated. I just don't like not knowing what's happening. Nobody does. He looked at the fire. But sometimes you don't get to know. Sometimes you just have to trust that what you built is solid enough to stand while you're gone. She didn't respond to that directly, but she stopped reaching for the phone. The power went out at 8:47. It wasn't subtle. One moment the wall sconces were on, the background hum of the lodge's ventilation system was running, and the next there was a deep, decisive click, and everything went dark, except for the fire and the emergency lighting that flickered on near the exits. A generator kicked in somewhere beneath the building. Michael heard it, and the heat held. The kitchen lights came back on, but the great room stayed in firelight. From somewhere in the back of the lodge, someone said a word that probably wasn't appropriate for mixed company. Then it was quiet again. Victoria sat very still. "We still have heat," Michael said. "And the fire." "I know." Her voice was controlled. Too controlled, the kind of controlled that was working hard. "I'm fine." "I didn't say you weren't." "You were about to." "I was about to say we should probably eat something," Michael said. Carl mentioned the kitchen was still running. She looked at him, and in the firelight, her face was doing something interesting. The professional mask that she wore in the office was cracking, not dramatically, not with tears or raised voices, but in the way that ice cracked in spring, quietly, incrementally along lines that had been under pressure for a long time. "I'm not hungry," she said. "You should eat anyway." "You sound like someone's father." "I am someone's father." That stopped her. She looked at him, actually looked at him the way you looked at someone, when you'd forgotten they had a life outside the context where you knew them. "You have a kid?" "A son. Caleb. He's 9. 9, she repeated quietly, like the number meant something. "He's with his grandmother this weekend. She lives about 20 minutes from my apartment. Takes him whenever I have to cover extra shifts." He paused. "Which is pretty often." "Where's his mother?" It was a direct question, maybe too direct for a person she'd spoken to a total of 4 times in 4 years. But Michael didn't flinch from it. "She left when Caleb was 3, he said. "Wasn't built for it. That's how I look at it now. Took me a while to get there, but that's where I landed." Victoria's hands tightened slightly around the mug. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It made us who we are, Caleb and me. He's a good kid. Better than I deserve, probably." She was quiet for a moment. "What's he like?" And Michael, who almost never talked about his son at work because his son was the most private and precious part of his life, found himself talking. Maybe it was the fire. Maybe it was the storm making the world feel very small and very honest. Maybe it was just that for the first time in 4 years, someone at Veritech Solutions was looking at him like he was a person with a life worth asking about. "He's got this laugh," Michael said. "Starts in his whole body before it gets to his face. You can see it coming. This huge open laugh." He shook his head. "He's obsessed with dinosaurs right now. Has been for about 2 years. He can tell you the diet and habitat of 43 different species I counted. He made me count." Victoria smiled. "A real one. Small, but real." "That's specific." "He's a specific kid." Michael looked at the fire. "He wants to be a paleontologist when he grows up. Last week he changed it to a baseball player. The week before that, a chef. He made us scrambled eggs for dinner and called them gourmet." He smiled at the memory. "They were pretty good, actually." "You're proud of him," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. "More than anything I've ever done in my life," Michael said. "By a long way." There was a weight to that statement that settled over both of them. Victoria turned her mug slowly in her hands. The fire shifted and rebuilt itself with a soft, collapsing sound. "I don't have children," she said. It came out in that particular register that people used when a fact was also a wound they'd learned to navigate around. That your choice. It started as a choice. Then it became... She paused. "It became not a choice anymore. And then it became something I didn't think about." She looked at the fire. "Or tried not to." Michael nodded. He didn't try to fix it or soften it. He just let it be what it was. The company was supposed to be enough, she said. For a long time it was. Building something from nothing, there's a feeling to that when it's working. Like you can see exactly what you're doing and why it matters. She exhaled slowly. Lately, I've been less certain about the why. Why it matters? Michael asked. Why any of it matters to me specifically. She shifted in the chair, tucking one foot up under her, an unconsciously small human gesture that he'd never have associated with the woman who'd told him his mop smelled. I gave a speech to my leadership team last month. 27 minutes, perfectly structured. I talked about growth and vision and the future of the company. And when I finished, I felt... She stopped. What? Nothing, she said. I felt nothing. I stood there in front of 110 people who were clapping, and I felt completely hollow. Michael didn't say anything for a moment. Then, did that scare you? Yes. The word came out quietly, quickly, like it had been waiting to be said to someone. Yes, it did. Outside, the storm sent a long, low howl through the building, a sound that went through the walls and into the bones. Victoria glanced at the window and then back at the fire with the deliberate determination of someone not giving the darkness any more acknowledgement than it deserved. The first time I was really scared in business, she said, the story coming now, like something unlocking, was in the 3rd year of the company. We had 42 employees, and we were 3 months from running out of money. I had a meeting with our lead investor on a Tuesday, and he told me very politely, very professionally, that he didn't think we were going to make it. He said it like he was telling me the weather. She paused. I went home that night, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I didn't sleep. I just sat there and made a list. Every decision I could make, every resource I had left, every person I could call. She looked at her hands. I called 16 people in 48 hours, restructured 3 contracts, cut 2 programs I'd been holding on to because I believed in them, not because they were performing, and we made it. You saved your company by yourself, Michael said. I did what needed to be done. That's what you always do. She looked at him. Yes. And after a while, Michael said carefully, that starts to feel like it's all you know how to do, even when someone else could help, even when you don't actually have to do it alone. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Victoria's eyes were very still, very focused on him, the way eyes got when something had reached in and touched something real. You're saying I don't know how to let people help me, she said. I'm saying you walked a mile through a blizzard in heels without asking for help, Michael said. You grabbed my arm because I told you to, not because you asked. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah, he said. There is. Accepting help when someone makes you isn't the same as trusting people enough to say, I can't do this alone. She didn't answer. The fire made its quiet sounds. Then she said very quietly, I can't remember the last time I said that. Michael nodded. He turned back to the fire. He wasn't going to make more of it than it was, wasn't going to push it toward a lesson or a resolution. That wasn't how people actually changed. They changed in quiet, incremental ways in the dark, by firelight, when the storm forced them to stop running long enough to feel the weight of what they were carrying. Carl appeared at 10 with 2 bowls of soup, and the apologetic bearing of a man who was very aware this wasn't what the CEO of a $3 billion company expected for dinner. Tomato bisque, he said, setting the bowls down. Best I could do on the generator kitchen. There's bread too if you want it. Victoria looked at the bowl. Thank you, Carl, Michael said. Carl nodded and withdrew. Victoria picked up the spoon. She tasted the soup. Then she ate in silence, and Michael ate his, and the fire kept burning, and the storm kept pressing against the glass, and the night stretched out around them without apology. Tell me something, Victoria said when the bowl was half empty. Okay. And I want an honest answer, not a polite one. Michael looked at her. When have I ever been polite? That almost laugh again. Closer this time. Fair point. She put the spoon down. In 4 years at Veritech working in that building, seeing the way things operate, what do you think of how I run things? It was a question with teeth. A question that in almost any other context a person in Michael's position would have deflected from, with careful, self-protective ambiguity. Michael thought about it for a real moment. Not performing consideration, actually considering. I think you built something real, he said. And I think somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing the people inside it as real. Victoria didn't react. She just looked at him waiting. I'm not saying you're cruel, he continued. I've worked for cruel people. You're not that. But there's a kind of distance, like the building is a machine and the people are parts of it. And when you look at the machine, you see whether it's running right, not whether the parts are okay. That's a management strategy, not a character flaw, she said. But she said it without full conviction. Sure, Michael said. But you asked what I think. I did. I think a leader who doesn't know the names of the people who clean her building is running something hollow at the center. He paused. I think you know that. I think that's part of why you felt nothing after that speech. The fire popped. The wind pressed the glass. Victoria Bradley looked at Michael Turner across that low table with its 2 empty soup bowls, and she didn't say anything for a long time. Then, what's your son's favorite dinosaur? Michael blinked. The shift caught him completely off guard. Therizinosaurus, he said. She repeated it slowly, like learning a word in a new language. Why that one? Because Michael said, and he was smiling now, genuinely, the way he only smiled when Caleb came up. Caleb says it looked ridiculous and still managed to survive. He thinks that's the whole point. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and this time she laughed. A real one. Full and unguarded, arriving in her whole body, the way Michael had described Caleb's laugh, doing before she'd even realized what she was doing. It was the first real thing Michael had seen from her all night. And outside, the storm raged on, unaware and unconcerned, doing what storms always did, stripping everything down to what was actually there. Victoria's laugh faded the way real laughter did, slowly, naturally, without her trying to pull it back. She didn't seem embarrassed by it. That was something. In the office, Michael had watched her interact with people for 4 years, and he'd never once seen her caught off guard by her own reaction to something. She was always 3 steps ahead of whatever was happening in the room, always composed before the room could see her composing herself. But that laugh had arrived before she could manage it. She picked up her coffee mug, found it empty, and set it back down. Therizinosaurus, she said again, quieter this time, almost to herself. A ridiculous-looking thing that survived anyway. She paused. Your son is 9 years old, and he already understands something most adults never figure out. Don't tell him that, Michael said. His head's big enough already. She smiled smaller this time, but it stayed longer. She leaned back in the chair and pulled the wool blanket Carl had left across her lap, and for a few minutes, neither of them said anything. The fire had settled into a deep, steady burn, the kind that didn't need tending yet, and the storm outside had found its rhythm, not getting worse, not letting up, just committed. Michael could feel the tiredness in his legs from the walk. His boots were still damp, and he'd set them near the hearth to dry. His socks were on the stone in front of the fire, which was probably the least professional thing that had ever happened near Victoria Bradley, but she hadn't said a word about it. That in itself felt like a significant development. Can I ask you something? He said. You've been asking me things all night, she said. Don't start requesting permission now. Fair enough. He watched the fire. When you were building the company in the early years before it was what it is now, what did you think it was going to feel like when you got there? She was quiet for a moment. Not the defensive quiet, not the composing herself quiet, the thinking kind. I thought it was going to feel like arrival, she said, like you'd been walking a very long road and you finally got to see the view from the top. She turned the empty mug in her hands. I thought there would be a moment where I'd stand in the middle of what I'd built and think this is it. This is the thing I made, and it would feel permanent, solid. But it didn't. There are moments, she said. There are absolutely moments. When a product ships and it works. When a team pulls something off that everyone said was impossible. When I look at the revenue numbers at the end of a quarter and see what we've built from nothing. She paused. But those moments last about 45 minutes. And then there's the next thing. And the thing after that. And the view from the top just becomes the starting point for the next climb. Sounds exhausting, Michael said. It is, she said. Simply, no defensiveness. Just the plain truth of it. It genuinely is. And I haven't said that out loud to anyone in, I can't even tell you how long. Why not? She gave him a look that was somewhere between amused and rueful. Because I'm the CEO. The CEO doesn't get to be exhausted. The CEO gets to be decisive and confident and 3 steps ahead. The CEO gets to perform certainty for 1,400 people who are counting on the company to be solid. She shook her head. You start letting cracks show at the top, the whole thing vibrates. Or, Michael said, the people under you realize you're human, and they stop being terrified of you, and they start actually telling you the truth. That landed somewhere. He could see it. People are terrified of me, she said. Ms. Bradley. He looked at her directly. I have watched grown adults in expensive suits reroute their entire path through a building to avoid being in an elevator with you. She was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know that. I believe you, he said. That's the thing I genuinely believe you didn't know. Is that supposed to make it better or worse? Neither. It just is what it is. He shifted in the chair. You can't fix what you don't know about. Now you know. She looked at the fire. Something was moving behind her eyes, not distress exactly, but recalculation. The way she'd looked standing in front of the ditch in the snow, assessing, processing, already trying to figure out the next move. I'm not going to tell you that you're a bad person, Michael said, before she could go wherever she was going in her head. Because I don't think that. I think you're a person who learned to survive in a particular way, and that way worked well enough for long enough that you forgot it wasn't the only way. She looked at him steadily. And what way is that? Alone, he said. You learned to do everything alone. The word settled between them with a weight that was out of proportion to its size. Victoria didn't deflect it. She sat with it. That was something Michael hadn't expected from her. Not the ability to be challenged, but the willingness to actually sit with what the challenge revealed, rather than immediately restructuring it into something more manageable. My father built his business alone, she said after a while. From nothing. Absolutely nothing. He came from a family that had nothing in a town that offered nothing, and he built a regional distribution company with his own hands, and his own decisions, and his own money. By the time he died, it was worth $40 million. She paused. He used to say that the only person you could ever count on completely was yourself. He said it the way other fathers said, I love you, like it was the most important thing he could give me. And you believed him. I had no reason not to. Her voice was level, but careful the way voices got when they were carrying something breakable. He was the most capable person I'd ever seen. And he was right in a lot of ways. He built something real. He proved that it could be done. She stopped. He also died at 63, with 3 ex-wives, 2 estranged children, and not a single person in that hospital room who wasn't there professionally. The fire made a sound. Michael said nothing. I was there, she said. I was in the room. But we hadn't really spoken, not about anything real, in probably 8 years. I held his hand, and I didn't know what to say to him. My own father. She exhaled slowly. And I thought in that room, I will not let that be me. I will build something real, and I will also have, I don't know. Something else. Something more. She looked at the blanket in her lap. Somewhere along the way, I forgot about the something else. When did you forget? Michael asked. I don't know, she said. That's the terrifying part. I don't know the exact moment it happened. It just the company needed me, and then it needed me more. And then I was all it, and it was all me. And one day I woke up and realized I hadn't been to dinner with a friend in 14 months. Not a real dinner. Not the kind where you sit there for 3 hours and talk about everything that's actually happening. She paused. I have a friend named Diane. We went to graduate school together. She's been trying to schedule lunch with me for 6 months. Have you called her back? I've had my assistant respond. Michael just looked at her. I know, Victoria said. I know. Call Diane, he said. When the storm clears, first thing. She nodded. Not performatively. She actually nodded like she was writing it down somewhere inside herself. Then she turned and looked at him with a directness that had shifted from its earlier quality. It wasn't the evaluating look anymore, the one that sorted and categorized. It was the look of someone who was genuinely trying to see something clearly. What about you? She said. What about me? You said you do everything for Caleb, that he's the beginning and end of your priorities. She paused. But what about Michael Turner? What does he want? The question caught him more off guard than he expected. He opened his mouth and found to his own mild surprise that the answer wasn't immediately there. I want Caleb to be okay, he said. That's not what I asked. I know what you asked. He sat forward, elbows on his knees. I'm thinking. He was quiet for a moment. And in that moment, something shifted in his own chest, something he hadn't looked directly at in a long time, the way you didn't look directly at the sun, because it was easier to keep moving if you didn't. I wanted to be an architect, he said. When I was younger, before everything changed. Victoria didn't react with surprise or sympathy. She just listened, which was, he realized, exactly right. I was 2 years into a civil engineering degree when Caleb's mother and I found out she was pregnant, he said. We were young, not ready. She wanted to keep going with her own plans, and I understood that I really did. I'm not carrying bitterness about it. But somebody had to be there for Caleb. So I made a choice. You left school. I left school, went to work, found the most stable thing I could find. He looked at his hands. I don't regret it. I want to be clear about that. If I'm standing at the end of my life looking back and Caleb grew up safe and loved and whole, that's enough. That will always be enough. But, Victoria said quietly. He exhaled. But sometimes when Caleb's asleep and the apartment's quiet, I get these, I don't know what to call them. Not regrets, more like echoes of something I used to want. And I look at my hands and I think about what they could have drawn. He stopped. That probably sounds small. It doesn't sound small at all, Victoria said. And there was nothing professional in the way she said it. No management empathy, no practiced sensitivity. Just one human being responding to the truth of another one. They sat with that for a while. The fire had dropped lower, and Michael got up to add wood from the stack Carl had left nearby. He worked efficiently, and without ceremony, the way he did most physical tasks, and when he sat back down, the fire was climbing again. I have a question, Victoria said, and you can tell me if it's none of my business. At this point, Michael said, ask away. Is there any part of you that resents it? Her voice was careful. Working at Veritech, in the position you're in, given what you could have been. He shook his head. No. I'll tell you why. Resentment means you think it should have gone differently, and I don't. Caleb is the best thing that ever happened to me. He didn't take something from me. He gave me something I didn't even know I needed. He paused. I'm not saying the road's been easy. It hasn't. But easy wasn't the point. Victoria was looking at him with an expression that was quietly undoing something in her. He could see it happening in real time, and he didn't try to steer it or name it. Some things needed to arrive in their own time. You're a better person than I am, she said. I'm just a different person, he said. I've had different things to teach me. Caleb taught you? "Caleb taught me everything," he said. "That kid, I used to think I was raising him. Now I think we raised each other." He almost smiled. "He told me once when he was maybe 6, he said, 'Daddy, why do you always look tired?' And I said I was just working hard." And he thought about it for a second. Really thought about it the way 6-year-olds do when they're serious. And he said, "I think you should rest more because you're the best dad, and I need you to live a long time." Victoria said nothing. But something moved across her face that she didn't bother to conceal. 6 years old, Michael said. And he already understood something about what matters that took me until I was 34 to start figuring out. It was somewhere past midnight now. Michael could feel it in his body, the long drive, the walk through the snow, the heat of the fire beginning to pull at him with the steady insistence of real tiredness. But he didn't want to stop. That was the strange thing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd sat in a room and talked like this, really talked without a timer running somewhere in the back of his head, without an ear out for Caleb, without the low background hum of everything that needed to be done. Victoria was leaning forward now, her elbows on her knees, mirroring his posture without seeming to notice. Her hair had come loose from whatever arrangement it had been in when they left Denver, and she hadn't fixed it. The Broncos beanie was on the arm of her chair. She looked in this firelight like a completely different person from the one who'd told him an elevator smelled wrong. She looked like someone who was remembering herself. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yeah. When I walked past you in the office." She stopped. Started again. "I walked past a lot of people. I didn't think about it. I had places to be and things to process, and the people in the hallways were just part of the architecture." She paused. "That's a horrible thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. It's both." She looked at him directly. "I didn't know your name. 4 years. I didn't know your name." "I know. I knew the name of the company that supplied our cleaning products. I knew the square footage of every floor in the building. I knew the load capacity of every elevator." She shook her head slowly. "I didn't know the name of the man who kept the building clean." "Michael," he said. She looked at him. "I know that now." "Good." "It's not good enough," she said. "But it's a start." He didn't argue with that, because she was right on both counts. Outside, the storm made a sound that was different from the sounds it had been making all night, a deeper shift, a change in register, the way music changed when the key moved. Michael tilted his head, listening. "Is that it?" Victoria asked. "Is it stopping?" "Not yet," he said. "But it's thinking about it." She almost smiled. "Storms think, the good ones do," he said. And then from somewhere in the back of the lodge, there was a crash. Heavy, sudden, and followed immediately by Carl's voice calling out something that Michael couldn't quite make out. He was on his feet before he registered, deciding to stand, moving toward the sound, all the tiredness dropping away the way it always did when something needed doing. "Stay here," he said. "I'm not staying here," Victoria said, and she was already up. They found Carl in the hallway off the kitchen, standing over a collapsed shelf unit that had given way under the weight of supplies shifted by some settling in the structure. A stack of emergency lanterns had gone down with it, along with canned goods and a first aid box that had popped open, scattering its contents across the floor. Carl was holding his left hand with his right, his face tight. "I'm all right," Carl said immediately, the automatic reflex of capable people who'd rather bleed than be fussed over. "Hand got caught. I'm fine." Michael was already crouching, pulling the shelf off the scattered contents, righting the heavy unit. "Victoria," he said without looking up. "There's a first aid kit on the floor there." And Victoria Bradley, who ran a $3 billion tech company and had an executive assistant and a personal staff and 1,400 employees, crouched down on the lodge floor in her stocking feet and started collecting the scattered supplies without a word of hesitation. Carl watched her do it with an expression of profound bewilderment. "Hand," Michael said to Carl. Carl held it out. The cut was on his palm, not deep, but bleeding enough to need attention. Michael cleaned and wrapped it with the same calm efficiency he'd brought to the walk through the blizzard, and the fire, and the night itself, methodical, unhurried, completely present. "You've done this before," Carl observed. "Boy Scout," Michael said. "Long time ago." Victoria had gathered everything back into the kit and was snapping it shut. She stood and handed it to Michael. He took it without comment and finished taping Carl's hand. When they walked back to the great room, the fire had dropped again. Victoria picked up the log before Michael could and set it on the grate herself, then stood there, watching it catch her arms crossed. "Thank you," Carl called after them from down the hall. "Get some sleep," Michael called back. Victoria watched the new log take the flame. Her face in the fresh firelight was still and serious in the way that very deep thinking made it serious, not cold, not managed, just genuinely occupied with something. "When we get back to Denver," she said. "Yeah. Things are going to be different." She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at the fire. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know they need to be different." Michael sat back down. "That's usually how it starts," he said, with not knowing exactly, but knowing anyway. She turned from the fire and looked at him. "Is that how it felt when you decided to stay for Caleb?" "Yeah," he said. "Exactly like that." She nodded, sat back down, pulled the blanket back over her lap. "Tell me more about him," she said. "Caleb." "Yeah." And Michael settled back into the chair, and the fire burned, and the storm outside shifted and rearranged itself, and he talked about his son, about the dinosaur encyclopedia. Caleb had read cover to cover twice about the way he set the table every night without being asked about the questions he asked, that had no answers about the laugh that started in his whole body before it got to his face. And Victoria Bradley listened, not as a CEO, not as a manager assessing an employee, just as a person sitting in the dark with another person letting something true come in through the cracks that the night had made. Michael didn't remember falling asleep. That was how deep the tiredness had gone, not the gradual negotiated drift of a man settling into bed at the end of a normal day, but the sudden total surrender of a body that had simply used everything it had and was done discussing it. One moment he was talking about Caleb's habit of leaving his baseball cleats in the exact center of the hallway where they were guaranteed to be tripped over, and the next he was gone, his head tilted back against the chair, one hand still loosely wrapped around an empty mug. He woke to silence. That was what registered first. Not light, not cold, not the stiffness in his neck from sleeping upright in a chair for God knows how long. Silence. After an entire night of the storm pressing its full weight against the lodge, throwing itself against every window and working its way into every gap in the old timber frame, the absence of it was so complete, it felt almost like a physical thing. Like a held breath. He sat forward. The fire had burned down to deep orange coals, still giving off heat, but no longer talking. The great room was gray, with early morning light filtering through the windows. Victoria was asleep in the chair across from him, the wool blanket pulled up to her chin, the Broncos beanie sitting on the table beside her where she'd placed it at some point in the night. Her face in sleep was the most undefended version of herself he'd seen, yet not sad, not tired, just still. The way a person looked when they'd finally stopped working for a few hours. He sat there for a moment, not moving, aware that what he was looking at was something private. Not intimate in any complicated sense, just the simple, rare privacy of a person who never let anyone see her without her armor actually being seen that way. By him. The janitor. He got up quietly and went to find Carl. Carl was already in the kitchen, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd been awake for a while and had organized his priorities without drama. He had coffee going. Actual coffee, not the generator kitchen approximation from the night before, and he had the back door open a few inches, looking out at the world the storm had left behind. "It's done," Carl said without turning around. He had the particular awareness of a man who ran a mountain lodge and had learned to sense motion and presence the way other people sensed temperature. "When did it stop?" Michael asked. "Around 4:30. Gave us about 8 inches up here. Road crews are already on Route 9. I talked to the county dispatch on the radio an hour ago. They're saying the road should be passable by mid-morning." Michael poured a mug of coffee and stood next to Carl at the open door. The air that came in was the cleanest air he'd breathed in a long time, cold and sharp, and carrying the particular quality of mountain mornings after serious weather when everything had been washed down to its essential self. "You okay?" Michael asked, nodding toward Carl's bandaged hand. "Good enough," Carl said. "Tight but not bad. I've had worse from a coffee mug." He turned to look at Michael with the straightforward appraisal of a man who said what he meant. "You two doing all right?" "That was a long night for unexpected company." "We managed," Michael said. Carl looked at him for a second longer than the question required. "She's different than I expected," he said. "Ms. Bradley, I've had corporate retreats here before. I know the type. She's—" He considered the word carefully. "She got real last night." "She did," Michael said. "So did you, I imagine." Michael looked at the snow-covered world outside the door. "Yeah," he said. "I imagine so." He took his coffee back to the great room. Victoria was awake, sitting up, the blanket folded neatly across her lap, looking at the windows with the expression of someone recalibrating. When she heard him come in, she turned. "It stopped," she said. "About 4:30. Road should be clear mid-morning." She nodded. Something moved across her face. Relief, yes, but also something else. Something that wasn't entirely comfortable. "Coffee," he said. "Please." He went and got her a mug. When he handed it to her, their fingers didn't quite touch, but it was close, the close proximity of two people who had spent a night in the particular honesty of shared crisis, and were now navigating the strange, slightly exposed feeling of mourning. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I've been sitting here for the last 10 minutes trying to figure out how to be normal again." Michael sat down. "Normal how? Normal as in—" She paused, choosing carefully. "Last night felt very open. And I don't do open generally. So, I'm sitting here trying to figure out where the line is between what was real and what was just the storm, making everything feel more significant than it actually." "Victoria," he said. She stopped. "It was real," he said. "All of it." She looked at him. Held the look for a moment. Then she nodded once, short, definitive, like closing a parenthesis. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She drank her coffee. He drank his. The coals in the fireplace were still giving off warmth, and the gray morning light was growing steadily, and somewhere outside, a bird was doing something optimistic. "I want to ask you something," Victoria said, "and I need you to be as honest as you've been all night." "Go ahead." "If I offered you a different position at Veritech—" She held up a hand before he could react. "I'm not saying this as a transaction. I'm not trying to buy last night or turn it into a business arrangement. I mean this genuinely." She paused. "You have a civil engineering background. You think systematically. You handle pressure without losing yourself. Those aren't common qualities." She looked at him directly. "There are real roles in our operations and facilities management division that you would be good at. Better than good." Michael was quiet. "I'm not offering you charity," she said. "I want to be very clear about that. I'm offering you an opportunity that I should have looked for a long time ago, and didn't, because I wasn't paying attention to the right things." He turned his mug slowly in his hands. He thought about the ceiling in Caleb's room. He thought about the baseball cleats. He thought about the civil engineering textbooks he still had in the back of his closet, 3 of them, which he'd kept without entirely knowing why. "What kind of timeline are you talking about?" he said. "I'd want to move quickly. There's an opening in operations that's been posted for 6 weeks. We haven't found the right person. It would mean a significant pay increase, benefits restructuring, flexible scheduling that we could work around your situation with Caleb. You'd restructure scheduling for a facilities management position. For the right person, she said without hesitation. Yes. He looked at her. She meant it, he could see that. This wasn't the soft management language that meant something else. This was a woman who, over the course of one storm and one fire-lit night, had shifted something in how she saw a particular person and was now trying to act on what the shift revealed. That meant something. It didn't mean everything, but it meant something. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. I don't mean that as a brush-off. I mean I actually need to think. I know, she said. I'm not expecting an answer in a lodge by a fire while I'm still wearing yesterday's clothes. She almost smiled. Take the time you need, but take it seriously. I will, she nodded and looked at the window. The light had shifted fully morning, now the sky having moved from gray to the pale washed blue that came after heavy weather when the air was rinsed clean. She watched it for a long moment with an expression that wasn't quite peace, but was in the neighborhood of it. I called Diane, she said. He blinked. When? About 20 minutes ago. My phone had enough charge from the station at the desk. I went while you were asleep. She paused. She picked up on the second ring. It was 6:15 in the morning on a Saturday. What did she say? Victoria's face did something complicated. She said, Victoria, I've been waiting for this call for 6 months. And then she said, Are you okay? She stopped. And I told her the truth. I said I'd had a strange night and I was starting to think I hadn't been okay for a while and I was working on it. How did that feel? Michael asked. Terrifying, she said. And then the most enormous relief I've had in years. She exhaled. We're having lunch on Tuesday, an actual lunch. Not a 30-minute working meal, a real lunch. She said she knows a place that doesn't take reservations from tech executives, and she will personally uninvite me if I bring my laptop. Michael laughed. A real one, open and unguarded, that surprised him with its own warmth. Victoria watched him laugh with an expression that was quietly delighted and slightly wondering, the way people looked when they witnessed a thing they'd been too closed off to allow in their own lives. She sounds like a good friend, he said when it settled. The best I have, Victoria said. The best I've done a very poor job of keeping. She paused. I'm going to fix that. Carl appeared in the doorway with a plate of toast and what appeared to be eggs scrambled on the generator kitchen and set it on the table between them without ceremony. Road crew saying 45 minutes to an hour, he said. Eat. They ate. It was simple and real and sufficient, which felt this morning like exactly the right kind of meal. It was the eggs that brought it out of her. They were about halfway through the plate when Victoria set her fork down with a deliberateness that Michael had come to recognize as her tell the small precise action she made when she was about to say something she'd been holding. I fired someone last month, she said. He waited. His name was Dennis Park. He'd been with the company for 7 years. He was in product development, which has been underperforming for about 18 months. I brought him in, I showed him the numbers, I told him the decision had been made. She paused. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for more time or make excuses. He just looked at me and said, Ms. Bradley, I want you to know that I've given this company everything I had. And I said I know and I appreciate that, but the numbers don't support, and I gave him the rest of the script. She exhaled. He shook my hand and he left. And I walked back to my office and I picked up the next thing on my list. She looked at the table. I didn't think about him again until that speech, the one where I felt nothing, and I suddenly thought about Dennis Park, and I thought he told me he gave everything he had, and I gave him a script. Michael was quiet. He has 2 daughters, she said. I know that now because I looked at his file after the speech. I didn't know it when I fired him. I sat in a room with a person for 35 minutes and ended a 7-year chapter of his professional life, and I didn't know his daughters' names. She picked up her fork, set it back down. I've been running a company of 1,400 human beings, like it was a machine with components, and the components have daughters, and I didn't know. What are you going to do about Dennis Park? Michael asked. She looked at him sharply. Not the old sharpness, the new kind, the one that was actually looking. I don't know if there's a role that fits, she said. But I'm going to find out. And if there is, I'm going to call him myself. Not my assistant. Not HR. Me. That's a hard call to make. Yes, she said. It is. But I think I've been avoiding hard things that aren't related to business for so long that I've confused professional toughness with personal courage. She paused. They're not the same thing. No, Michael agreed. They are definitely not the same thing. She picked up her coffee and looked at him over the rim of the mug. How are you so calm all the time? I'm not calm all the time, he said. I'm calm when it matters because I've practiced not panicking. When you're a single parent, you don't have the luxury of losing it. Caleb needs me functional, so I stay functional. What does losing it look like for you? My car, he said, without missing a beat. I have a 2009 Honda Civic that I have had every single conversation with myself I was never able to have with another person. That car has absorbed 12 years of things I couldn't say out loud anywhere else. He paused. Frustration, grief, fear, anger at things I couldn't change. I've pulled into parking lots and just sat there until I could breathe right again. He looked at her. Everybody needs somewhere to lose it. The problem is when people don't have anywhere, and they think losing it is the same as weakness. Is it weakness? Losing it in the right place, with the right understanding that you'll come back from it. He shook his head. No, that's just being a person. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Something between admiration and grief, the feeling of recognizing something true that you'd spent a long time walking past. I don't have a parking lot, she said. You've got Diane, he said. She considered that. I've got Diane, she agreed. The sound of a vehicle on the road outside brought them both to attention, the heavy mechanical grind of a county plow working its way past the lodge access, the orange beacon visible through the window even at distance. Carl confirmed it a minute later. Route 9 was open. The SU-5 in the ditch had already been called in to a tow service and would be handled within the hour. The retreat executives were beginning to surface from their rooms, filtering into the dining area, with the slightly dazed quality of people who'd slept through the storm and were now emerging into a changed world. Michael heard their voices. The executive cadences, the morning after a leadership retreat energy brisk and purposeful. He watched Victoria's face as she heard them. Something moved through her, a pulling together, a subtle reorientation. Not the full armor going back on, but the awareness of context returning. She was the CEO. They were her team. The lodge was the lodge, not the fire-lit private world it had been for the last 12 hours. But she didn't fully close. That was what mattered. She heard her VPs in the next room, and she straightened slightly, but she didn't put the mask all the way back on. She looked at Michael with something deliberate, something she was choosing to keep visible even as the professional world walked back in. I meant what I said, she said. About the position. About thinking I should have been paying attention differently for a long time. She paused. I also want to say something else. Okay. Last night, she stopped. Started again. I've had a lot of high-stakes nights in my career. I've negotiated deals that kept me up for 72 hours. I've been in rooms with some of the most powerful people in this industry, and I don't think any of it has cost me more, or given me more than sitting in that room with you and the fire, and no way to manage any of it. Michael held her gaze. That's what happens when you can't control the situation. I know, she said. I think I needed to not be able to control it. The door from the dining room opened, and one of her VPs, a tall, energetic man named Foster, who Michael had seen a dozen times at Veritech, and who had also never spoken to him, came in with the confident, rapid stride of someone ready to brief the boss. "Ms. Bradley, glad you made it. Hell of a storm. We've been trying to reach you since last night." He stopped when he registered Michael assigning him a quick categorizing glance that landed somewhere in the vicinity of not executive staff. "We've got the morning agenda restructured for a 10 o'clock start." "Foster," Victoria said. "Yes. This is Michael Turner. He works in facilities maintenance at Veritech. He drove me up here through that storm, walked a mile through the blizzard with me, when we went into a ditch, kept us both warm through a power outage, and helped Carl handle a supply situation in the middle of the night." She paused. "He is the reason I'm sitting here rather than in a snowdrift on Route 9. Foster blinked, looked at Michael, extended a hand. "Foster Reed, VP of Product." "Michael Turner," Michael said, and shook it. Foster recovered quickly with the adaptability of a man who'd learned to read the room around Victoria Bradley very carefully. "Can I get you anything, Michael? Coffee? We've got breakfast set up in the dining room." "I'm good," Michael said. "Thank you." Foster looked at Victoria, reading something in her face that he clearly hadn't seen before and was filing away. 10 o'clock, he said. 10:30, she said. "Give people time for an actual breakfast." She paused. "And Foster, cancel the performance metrics review for this morning's session. I want to start with something different." "What topic?" "People," she said. "I want to start by talking about the people in our building, not the numbers they represent, the people." Foster held her gaze for a moment. Something passed across his face that wasn't confusion, it was closer to relief. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he left without another word. Michael looked at her. "One meeting," she said. "One different meeting. That's where it starts." "That's where it starts," he agreed. She stood up and picked up the Broncos beanie from the table beside her chair. She looked at it for a moment. This ridiculous orange and blue hat that had kept her ears from freezing on a mountain road in the worst storm of January, and then held it out to him. He took it, turned it over in his hands. "It's your hat," she said. "It's been through a lot," he said. "So have we." A beat. "Keep it." He looked at her. She was already reaching for her coat, already beginning the soft transition back into the person the world outside this room required her to be. But she wasn't all the way there yet. She was still in this moment the woman who had walked a mile through a blizzard and sat by a dying fire and told the truth about her father and her loneliness and the hollow feeling after a perfect speech. "Victoria," he said. She turned. "Call Dennis Park this week," he said. "Don't let the list push it." Something moved across her face. "I won't," she said. "And eat lunch with Diane, the whole lunch." "The whole lunch," she said. "I promise." He nodded. She nodded. It was the simplest possible conclusion to the strangest 12 hours either of them had lived in a long time. She started toward the dining room, paused at the doorway. "Michael." She said his name like she was making sure she had it right, like she was committing it to a category that would not be misfiled again. "Thank you. For the emergency kit," he said. "For everything else," she said. And she walked into the dining room where 14 of the most powerful people in her company were eating breakfast and preparing to spend the day talking about growth and vision and the future, completely unaware that their CEO had already done the most important work of the entire weekend by a dying fire in her stocking feet, wearing a Broncos beanie, listening to a janitor talk about his son. Michael stood in the empty great room for a moment. He picked up the 2 mugs from the table, the last of the night's coffee cold now, and carried them to the kitchen where Carl was loading the dishwasher. "Road's good," Michael said. "Tow truck's on its way for the SUV," Carl said. "Should have you back on 9 within the hour." "Good." Michael set the mugs down and looked out the kitchen window at the snow-covered world. "Carl." "Yeah." "You need anything else done before I head out?" That shelf unit in the hall is going to need better anchoring. The bracket on the left side gave way. I noticed a crack in the frame too. If you've got some basic hardware, I could take a look before I go." Carl turned from the dishwasher and looked at him with the quiet appreciation of one competent man recognizing another. "Yeah," he said. "I've got hardware, and I wouldn't say no." Michael rolled up his sleeves and got to work, because that was who he was. The man who showed up, the man who stayed functional, the man who fixed the thing that was broken and didn't wait to be thanked for it. The man who had walked through a blizzard with his boss and come out the other side with something neither of them had arrived with the clear, clean recognition of what actually mattered. And outside the mountain sat under its clean white cover, quiet and enormous, and completely indifferent to all of it the way mountains always were. The storm was done. The road was open. The world was waiting. The tow truck arrived at 9:47, driven by a heavy-set man named Roy, who had the particular cheerfulness of someone who made his living off other people's bad days and had long since made peace with that arrangement. He hooked up the SUV from the ditch on Route 9 with the efficient ease of a man who'd done it 1,000 times, pulled it back onto solid ground, checked the undercarriage with Michael crouching beside him, and declared it drive-worthy with the confidence of someone who knew the difference between cosmetic damage and structural damage and wasn't in the business of exaggerating either. "Front right suspension took a knock," Roy said, wiping his hands on a rag. "She'll drive, but I'd get it into a shop before you put serious highway miles on it." "How far to Denver?" Michael asked. "On a cleared Route 9, 2 hours easy. She'll make that." Michael thanked him, and Roy drove off into the mountain morning with the cheerful indifference of a man who had 3 more calls before noon. Michael stood next to the SUV and looked at the ditch for a moment, the compressed snow where the front wheel had dropped, the slight scarring in the shoulder where they'd gone in. It looked smaller in daylight. In the dark and the storm, it had felt like a catastrophe. Now it looked like what it actually was, a bad moment on a difficult road that had been survived. He got in the vehicle and turned the heat on. Sat there while it warmed up, his hands on the wheel, his eyes on the road ahead. He thought about the offer. He'd been thinking about it since Victoria said it, turning it over the way he turned difficult things over, not rushing toward a conclusion, but letting the weight of it settle so he could feel what it actually was underneath the immediate reaction. That was something fatherhood had taught him. Caleb had asked him once why he always waited before answering important questions, and Michael had told him, because a fast answer is usually the answer you already had before you heard the question, and that's not always the right one. Caleb had nodded very seriously, and then asked if they could have pizza for dinner. Michael smiled at the windshield. The offer was real. He believed that. Victoria Bradley had not made it as a gesture of guilt or as the kind of morning-after generosity that evaporated when the moment passed. He'd seen enough of her in 12 hours to know that she didn't operate on sentiment, even now, even changed. She was still fundamentally a person who made decisions based on what she believed was true. And she believed he was capable of more than what she'd seen him doing. She was right. He knew that, and the knowing didn't feel like vanity. It felt like a fact he'd been quietly carrying for 4 years without anywhere to put it. He also knew something else. Something that had clarified for him while he was fixing Carl's shelf bracket that morning, working with his hands in the back hallway of the lodge, doing the particular kind of focused, physical problem-solving that had always brought him his clearest thinking. He knew that the answer wasn't simple, and he knew that simple-looking answers to complicated questions were usually the ones that cost you something you hadn't planned on paying. He put the SUV in drive and headed down Route 9 toward Denver. His mother's house was a 40-minute drive from his apartment, a small, impeccably kept ranch house in Aurora, where she'd lived for 22 years, and which she maintained with the fierce, quiet pride of a woman who had worked for everything she owned. She opened the door before he was all the way up the front path the way she always did, like she had a sensor attuned specifically to his footsteps. "You look like you slept in a chair," she said. "I did sleep in a chair." "Lord." She held the door open. "Come in. Caleb's in the kitchen." Caleb hit him in the stomach at approximately the speed and force of a small enthusiastic missile arms locked around Michael's midsection, face pressed into his jacket, the whole weight of a 9-year-old operating at full emotional commitment. "Dad, you were gone forever." "It was one night, Cal. The storm was on the news. Grandma let me watch the Weather Channel." "Since when do you watch the Weather Channel?" "Since last night when I was worried about you." Caleb tilted his head back to look up at him with the particular expression he got when he was trying to be mature and failing slightly due to the tears still visible at the corners of his eyes. "I wasn't scared." "I know you weren't," Michael said, and pulled him in tighter. He stood there in his mother's front hallway, holding his son, and let the last 24 hours complete themselves in some internal register he didn't have a name for. The storm, and the ditch, and the mile-long walk, and the firelit room, and Victoria Bradley taking a Broncos beanie without argument, and the sound of her real laugh arriving before she could manage all of it settled into place behind the simple, irreducible weight of his kid in his arms. This was the thing. This was always the thing. His mother stood in the hallway and watched him with the quiet, knowing expression of a woman who had raised this man and understood him in the wordless way that only long love produced. She didn't ask anything. She went back to the kitchen where something was on the stove that smelled like Sunday and let him have the moment. "Are you hungry?" Caleb said, muffled against his jacket. "Starving," Michael said. "Grandma made her soup." "I know. I can smell it." Caleb pulled back and looked up at him with a new urgency. "Dad, I have to tell you something important." "Okay." "I found out that the Rhizinosaurus had feathers, actual feathers, like a bird but huge and terrifying. I've been saving this information since yesterday, and I almost called you, but Grandma said your phone was probably off." Michael looked at his son, this specific, irreplaceable human being who had reorganized his entire existence and never once apologized for it, and never needed to. "Tell me everything," he said. He called Victoria on Monday morning. Not from the car, not from the parking lot before his shift. He called from his kitchen table at 7 a.m., while Caleb was eating cereal and watching something on the tablet, with one earbud in the particular multitasking arrangement of a 9-year-old who had inherited his father's capacity for focused attention. She picked up on the third ring. "Michael." "Morning," he said. "You have a few minutes." "I have a 7:30, but yes." "Then I'll be quick." He looked at his hands on the table. "I've been thinking about what you said at the lodge." "I know you have," she said. There was a quality to her voice he didn't recognize from the office attentive without the impatience underneath. Like she was actually just listening. "I want to talk to you about the position," he said. "In person, not in the building." A pause. "All right. There are things I want to be clear about before anything moves forward. Things I'd need from the arrangement that go beyond the job description." "Tell me," she said. "Not on the phone," he said. "Over coffee. Somewhere that isn't Veritech." Another pause. "There's a place on Colfax, Benson's. Do you know it?" "I know it. Tomorrow morning, 7:15, before either of us is in the building." "I'll be there," he said. He hung up. Caleb looked up from his tablet. "Who was that?" "My boss." Caleb processed this. "The mean one." Michael looked at his son. "Where'd you hear about the mean one?" "You told Grandma once. I was supposed to be asleep." "You're never actually asleep when you're supposed to be asleep." "I'm 9, Caleb said, as if this explained everything which Michael supposed it did. "Is she still mean?" He thought about that, about a woman sitting in stocking feet by a dying fire, laughing at the name of a dinosaur she'd never heard of before. About her voice saying, "I've been waiting to talk to someone like this for a long time," without actually saying the words, just through everything she couldn't stop herself from saying. "She's working on it," Michael said. Benson's was the kind of coffee shop that had been on Colfax for 30 years, and had survived every wave of gentrification by being aggressively uncomplicatedly itself. Linoleum floors, mismatched chairs, coffee that was strong enough to be taken seriously. A regular clientele of nurses coming off night shifts and construction workers starting early ones, and old men reading actual newspapers with the focused dedication of a dying art form. Michael loved it for exactly these reasons. It was a room full of people who were there to do something, not to be seen doing it. Victoria arrived at 7:13, 2 minutes early, in a wool coat different from the one she'd worn on Friday, but carrying the same leather briefcase. She scanned the room when she came in the automatic assessing sweep of someone who always wanted to know what she'd walked into, and found him in the back corner booth and came straight over without ordering first. She slid in across from him. "You ordered already." "Black coffee for you," he said. Figured that was safe. She looked at the mug. "It is." She picked it up. "You look rested." "I slept in a real bed last night. It helped." He looked at her. "You?" "I slept 4 hours and drafted 12 new agenda items and called 3 people I'd been avoiding." She paused. "Progress." He almost smiled. "Dennis Park." "Thursday," she said. "I'm calling him Thursday. I wanted a few days to find out whether there's actually a role before I called. I didn't want to raise his hopes and then have nothing real to offer." "Is there?" "Yes," she said. "There's a project lead position in product development that we restructured last week. It's not the role he had, but it's real work, and it's a fair offer." She paused. "I'm going to make the call myself. I've already told my assistant not to schedule it. I'm doing it." "Good," Michael said. She wrapped her hands around the mug. "You said you had conditions." "I said I had things I needed to be clear about," he said. "That's not quite the same as conditions." "Close enough. Tell me." He'd thought about how to say this. He'd sat at his kitchen table after Caleb went to bed on Sunday night and worked through it the way he worked through everything carefully without shortcuts. Because the thing about an opportunity was that the wrong version of it could cost you the very things it was supposed to help you build, and he had not come this far by being careless with what mattered most. "Caleb is non-negotiable," he said. "Whatever the role is, the hours, the travel, any of it. If it puts me in a position where I can't be there for him, the way I am now, I'm out. That's not a preference. That's a wall." "I understand that," she said. "I also want to be clear that I'm not coming in to be your project. I'm not a story about potential that you discovered during a storm." He looked at her directly. "If this is a real offer for a real role based on what I can actually do, then I want to hear it and I'll consider it seriously. If it's something else, tell me now." She held his gaze. The morning noise of Benson's moved around them coffee cups conversation, the particular hum of a room full of people living their lives without complication. "It's a real offer," she said. "You'd be reporting to our head of operations, not to me directly. The role involves facilities oversight, vendor coordination, and project management for our infrastructure expansion. It requires exactly the kind of systematic thinking and calm under pressure that I watched you demonstrate on a mountain road in a blizzard." She paused. "It's not a gift. You'd have to perform. You'd be evaluated like everyone else." "Good," he said. "The pay is $72,000 to start. Structured review at 6 months." He was quiet for a moment. The number landed with a weight that he absorbed without letting his face show what it meant. What it would mean for the leak in Caleb's ceiling, for the baseball cleats, for the textbooks in the back of the closet that he'd kept without knowing why. "Flexible scheduling," he said. "I talked to HR on Saturday," she said. "There's a core hours arrangement that would work with school pickup. It would require some evening catch-up occasionally, but the structure would protect the afternoon window." "You talked to HR on Saturday," he said. "I told you I wasn't offering charity." She paused. "I also told HR we needed better flexible scheduling options across the board, not just for this role. It's a conversation that was apparently overdue." He looked at her. She was the same Victoria Bradley who had told him an elevator smelled wrong and handed him a folder without knowing his name. She was also someone else now, or more accurately, she was also someone she'd been before she'd buried it under 4 years of accumulated control. Both of those people were sitting across from him in this linoleum-floored coffee shop on Colfax, and he could see them both. "I want to talk to the head of operations before I decide," he said. "I want to understand what the role actually is from the person I'd be reporting to. Not through HR, not through a summary. A real conversation." "I'll arrange it," she said. "This week if you're willing." "I'm willing." She nodded. Something in her shoulders released slightly, not relief at getting what she wanted, but the relief of a transaction that had been handled with integrity on both sides. She recognized that. He could tell. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been asking me things since Friday," she said. "Don't start requesting permission now." She said it back to him, his own words from the lodge, with the faintest trace of something that wasn't quite a smile, and was better than one. "Why are you doing this?" he said. The real answer. She considered the question with the same serious attention she'd given everything he'd asked her in that firelit room. She didn't reach for the easy version. "Because I spent 4 years walking past a person who was right in front of me," she said. "And I've spent the last 3 days understanding what that cost, not just him, but me. The version of myself that could walk past someone that way wasn't someone I want to keep being." She paused. "This isn't absolution. I know that. One opportunity for one person doesn't fix the pattern. But it's where I can start. And the rest of it," he said. "The pattern. I started a list," she said, "of things I've been doing by reflex that I want to do by choice instead. It's a long list." A pause. "The first thing on it was to learn the names of everyone in the building I don't know." He looked at her. "There are 11 people in facilities maintenance," she said. "I knew 2 of them. I know 9 more now." She looked at her coffee. "It took me 40 minutes on Saturday to pull the org chart and read through it. 40 minutes. That's what it cost me not to know for 4 years." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "Gerald," he said. "Gerald Watts," she said. "Facilities supervisor. Been there 11 years. His daughter just started at CU Boulder." Michael sat back in the booth. Something moved through him that was too large to name. Precisely, it was made up of too many things at once. Respect and surprise, and something sadder than either, the awareness of how long it had taken and how much it had required to get to a place that should have been the starting point. "That's good, Victoria," he said. She nodded. "It's a start," she said, using his word back at him again, deliberate this time. He took the meeting with the head of operations on Wednesday. Her name was Sandra Cho, a compact, direct woman in her mid-40s who had the particular efficiency of someone who ran things because she was genuinely good at it, and not because she needed anyone to know she was good at it. She laid out the role without embellishment, answered his questions without defensiveness, and at the end of 40 minutes looked at him and said, "I'll be honest with you. I don't care how this opportunity came to my desk. I care whether you can do the job. From this conversation, I think you can. The rest is up to you." He told her he'd have an answer by Friday. He spent Thursday night at his kitchen table after Caleb was asleep. Actually asleep this time. The deep, ungovernable sleep of a kid who'd worn himself out at baseball practice. And he looked at the ceiling of the apartment. He looked at the water stain in the corner of the living room that had been there since October. He looked at his hands. Then he got up, went to the back of the closet, and pulled out the 3 civil engineering textbooks he'd kept for 12 years without knowing why. He set them on the kitchen table, sat down in front of them, put his hand on the top cover. He sat like that for a long time. Then he took out his phone and called his mother. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she'd been waiting. "Baby," she said. "Mama," he said. "Can I talk to you about something?" "You can always talk to me about something," she said. "That's what I'm here for." So he told her, all of it, the storm, the ditch, the lodge, the fire-lit room, Victoria Bradley in a Broncos beanie, talking about her father dying alone in a hospital room. He told her about the offer and the meeting with Sandra Cho, and what it would mean for the ceiling and the cleats and the textbooks. He told her what he was afraid of and what he wanted, and how those two things had been so tangled up for so long he'd stopped trying to separate them. His mother listened. She did what she'd always done. She let him talk until he was empty, and then she was quiet for a moment. And then she said the thing that only she could say. Michael Edward Turner. She said, "Your father and I did not raise you to be comfortable. We raised you to be capable. There's a difference." He didn't say anything. "You've been choosing the safe thing for Caleb's sake for 9 years," she said. "And I understand that. I respect that. But Caleb is 9 years old, and he is going to spend the rest of his life learning from watching you. And what I want him to learn from his father is that a man moves forward. Not perfectly, not without fear, but forward." He looked at the textbooks on the table. "You kept those books," she said. "How did you know about the books?" "Baby, I know everything." A pause. "You kept them because some part of you wasn't ready to let go of the thing you wanted. That part of you was right. Listen to it." He exhaled, long and slow, the way you exhaled when something had been compressed for a very long time and finally had room to move. "It's scary," he said. "Of course it is," she said. "Do it anyway." He called Sandra Cho on Friday morning and said yes. He told Gerald first, because Gerald deserved to hear it from him directly, not from an email, and Gerald sat in the supply room and looked at Michael with an expression that was equal parts genuine happiness, and something that might have been the particular pride of a man watching someone he'd believed in for a long time finally step into what they were supposed to be. "It's about time," Gerald said. "You knew. Michael, I've been watching you fix things that weren't in your job description for 4 years, because you couldn't walk past something broken without dealing with it." Gerald shook his head. "Yeah, I knew." He started the new role on the first Monday of February. The first thing he did before he unpacked the box into his new desk, before he read through the first briefing document Sandra had sent, before any of it was walk down to the facilities area and find the 9 people whose names he'd gotten from Victoria's list. He introduced himself, not as the new hire, not with any ceremony. Just, "I'm Michael." I wanted to say hello. 8 of the 9 already knew who he was. The 9th was a woman named Patricia, who'd started 2 weeks earlier, and whose face, when someone from the upper floors came down specifically to say her name, was something Michael intended to remember for a long time. He saw Victoria in the hallway on his 3rd day. She was moving fast. She was always moving fast with the briefcase and the coat and the particular forward energy of a woman who had 1,400 people and 11 items on her morning agenda. She would have walked past him 6 weeks ago. He knew that. She knew that. She stopped. "Turner," she said. "Bradley," he said. She almost smiled. The almost smile he'd gotten good at reading. "How's the role?" 3 days in. Ask me in a month." "I will." She started to move. Stopped again. "How's Caleb?" "He informed me last night that he's starting a dinosaur podcast," Michael said. "He wants me to be the co-host." "Are you going to do it?" "Obviously," he said. The almost smile became a real one. Small, genuine, the same one that had arrived in the fire-lit room before she could manage it. "Good," she said. She walked on. He watched her go, this complicated, brilliant, difficult, changing woman who had handed him a folder without knowing his name and would probably never fully, completely shed the parts of herself that made her hard to be around. But who had also sat in a storm and told the truth and called her friend at 6:15 in the morning and learned 9 names in 40 minutes and was slowly, imperfectly, in the only way real change ever actually happened moving forward. He turned and walked toward his new office. The hallway was clean. It was always clean. He'd made sure of it for 4 years quietly and without acknowledgement. And he would make sure of other things. Now, different things. Larger things, with the same steady, unhurried attention he'd brought to every floor, every hallway, every task that had ever been given to him. He was not the same man who had punched in at 5:47 a.m. with his mop cart and his Johnny Cash and his father's voice telling him never to feel smaller than God made him. He was something forward from that man, not a different person, not a transformation that erased what he'd been, but the next version of the same thing. Built from the same material. Made better by everything it had survived. And in the back of his closet at home, the 3 civil engineering textbooks sat on the shelf where he'd put them. Thursday night, no longer waiting, no longer a question mark, but a beginning. Because that's what storms did when you were honest about what you found in them. They didn't end things. They cleared the ground. They stripped everything down to what was real, and they left you standing in the quiet afterward, with a clean, cold sky above you, and the whole road visible, and the only question that remained was whether you were willing to walk it. Michael Turner was willing. He had always been willing. He just finally had somewhere worth walking to.